This
is Democracy,
a podcast that explores the interracial, intergenerational, and intersectional
unheard voices living in the world's
most influential democracy.
Welcome to our new episode of This is Democracy. This week we're going to talk about the democratic protests in Hong Kong and how we understand the events in Hong Kong happening before our eyes and the future of relations between Hong Kong and China and the future of democracy movements in that part of the world. We're very fortunate to have with us Shery Chanis. Good morning, Shery.
Good morning.
Shery is a Ph.D. candidate in the history department here at the University of Texas. She's also a very distinguished teaching assistant. She was, in fact, one of my teaching assistants. She's writing really a fascinating dissertation. She's finishing it as we speak on the formation of the southern maritime province of Guangdong and its identity in relationship to China, East Asia, and the wider world. Shery does a lot of fantastic work looking at how parts of China thought of themselves in relationship to the wider world through maps, through travel, and that's, of course, very relevant for thinking about Hong Kong today. There's no part of the world, I think, that's more interconnected than Hong Kong. Shery is a native of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is her home city, so she has a very direct personal as well as scholarly connection to the events occurring there, and we're really, really fortunate to have you with us today, Shery.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Before we turn to Shery's expert insights, we have Zachary's poetic insights. What's the title of your poem today, Zachary?
Hanging Between.
Hanging Between. Let's hear it.
I have never been to Hong Kong. I have never had to face the August heat to storm the Secretariat Politburo for my freedom against policemen with medieval shields. I have never had to close an international airport to protect democracy. Never had to face tear gas bombs and packed streets for justice. I have never slept on cold jail floors, fearing electric currents and rigged judiciaries, screamed myself hoarse on crying streets, shoved myself forward among masses of people to force open the doors of freedom. But we are all with you, staring out our bedroom windows at night. We are all standing among you, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 11, beginning to count months, years, until we can finally count votes. And we are with you, haunting the condensation of your water bottles in the blistering sun. You may not hear our feet marching with you. You may not hear our voices chanting. But we are with you in spirit as we wait in line at the bank, jog in morning mists. And I sat once with a son of yours on a bench outside a boba tea place in an English college town, and I listened to your past and your present, and I am with you again every time I sit at a park bench and stare at your future, hanging between Union Jacks and hammers and sickles.
Wow. I like the way you brought in Union Jacks, hammers, and sickles, but also boba teas. That's great. You have finally worked that into a poem. Beyond boba tea, what is your poem about?
My poem's really about what it's like to view democratic struggle, and particularly that in Hong Kong, as someone who comes from a country where democracy is embedded in our society for so long. And it's really about how we stand in solidarity with the events in Hong Kong, but at the same time, we're limited in how we respond and in the ways that we are willing to respond.
And why do you think we're limited?
I think we're really limited because of a lack of courage by our leadership, but also political realities and economic realities right now that make it very hard to lend material support.
Right. Well, these are all issues we need to discuss. Shery, for those of us who are not experts on this region, how should we understand this student movement? Who are the students? What's going on here in Hong Kong? How should we understand it?
Well, before I answer your question, I just wanted to respond to Zachary's poem. I thought it was really well written, and you know a lot about what's been going on, and it's very impressive, and I hope that you'll keep watching the news and just keep going and with what you're doing. So, and then in terms of what's going on, right, the protests that we're seeing right now, they really have evolved from efforts to oppose the extradition bill. And that's basically how this round of protests began. And over the past 2 months and since June, really, the protests have evolved into anti-government protests, actually. So the protesters are really dealing with much bigger issues, more than just opposing the extradition bill. It's really about not trusting the government at this moment.
Gotcha. And just to remind people about the extradition bill?
Sure. The extradition bill is an amendment to the current extradition law that was in place right before the handover of Hong Kong from Britain to China.
1997.
Right. The handover was 1997. If I'm not mistaken, I think the current extradition law was in place in 96.
Okay.
So just very shortly before. And the extradition law has arrangements with, I think, about 20 countries around the world. But it excludes mainland China, Taiwan, and Macau, the closest areas to Hong Kong. And so what the government is trying to do is, in their words, try to close this loophole, try to make arrangements between Hong Kong and these places in case there are fugitives in Hong Kong who need to be extradited. So on the surface, it seems a very logical arrangement, but what really concerns most Hong Kong people is the discrepancy between the legal system in Hong Kong and also the legal system in mainland China.
Sure.
So it's there. Before the protests that we're seeing today, there was actually talks between the government and the commercial sector, the businessmen, for example. They were among the first to actually express concerns about this amendment bill because the bill actually includes a lot of economic offenses. Okay. So if a businessman from Hong Kong, for example, does business in China and then intentionally or unintentionally commit a crime that is illegal, deemed under the Chinese legal system, then they could be found wanting.
Even if it's legal in Hong Kong.
Right. So there's a lot of concern, and the government made some compromises, took off about 9 offenses, but at the same time, the legal professionals in Hong Kong also expressed concern about this amendment because in their expert opinion, there's just too many loopholes as the government was trying to close this loophole. So, and then word got to the general public very quickly about this bill, and like I said before, the general concern, the main concern is really unintentionally doing something in mainland China and then not knowing that they have committed a crime, and then they would become fugitive in Hong Kong. So in the gist, this is what the concern about the amendment is. And so...
and just one question on that. This could also be used for political crimes, right? So if you said something that is illegal to say in mainland China but legal in Hong Kong, you could be extradited to China under this proposed bill, right?
Correct. And also religious freedom as well. So it's a sweeping reform or amendment bill, if you will.
And a challenge to freedoms that citizens of Hong Kong cherish.
Right, yeah. So that's really, to Hong Kong people, is really a threat to their freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, and freedom to express their opinions in whatever means that we can right now.
Mm-hmm. And so how did those protests, which seemed to succeed in persuading Miss Lam, who's the Chinese appointed person responsible for Hong Kong, and others, persuaded them to pull this bill back.
Right.
Why didn't that end the problems?
So the official language that Mrs. Lam said was to suspend the bill. And that was her first official response to the massive demonstrations in early June. And for the Hong Kong people, they were not happy. They were not satisfied because they were afraid that even though she has said suspend, the bill could come back later. And so what they really want, what Hong Kong people really want, is for the government to officially say withdraw the bill, which Carrie Lam has not said.
I see.
So, and she has since said the bill has died. That's her second comment about the bill, and she said that it's not coming back, it's died, there's no chance. But Hong Kong people still, they want to hear withdrawal.
Okay.
So they want to really know that this is not coming back.
I see.
So.
And is that what has led to the escalation of the conflict on the ground?
Correct. Yeah. So so the public wants the bill to be withdrawn completely. They want the government to specifically say that, use that wording, but they also have a few other issues that they want to raise with the government. And so withdrawing the bill is one, and they also want Carrie Lam to step down, actually.
I see.
So because she's not voted in by the Hong Kong people, and there's no system for Hong Kong people to vote for their top leader. So
She's appointed by Xi Jinping? Is that what happened?
it's not quite appointed. There is a 1,200-member committee who could vote for the chief executive, which is the president equivalent in the Hong Kong government. And most of these 1,200 people, they're business people. They have vested interests in with Beijing. So there's voting on the surface, but it's not a universal thing in Hong Kong. So that's also one of the demands that Hong Kong people want is Hong Kong people have never been able to vote for their top leader, and not when it was a British colony, not since the handover. And so this is really something that Hong Kong people want. They want a leader that they vote for, that can be held accountable. And because right now a big issue too with Carrie Lam is she has said she's not stepping down, she's not resigning, and she's going to continue with her role. But she is not popular among Hong Kong people, and because Hong Kong people feel that she has made mistakes, and she is not bearing the responsibility. So that's another issue that the protesters want the government to address, and also I think as we know, the protesters have escalated. The protests have escalated, and we're seeing more violence, and there have been more clashes between the protesters and the police, and there has been a lot of accusations against the police about excessive use of force. So this is something that really has angered a lot of Hong Kong people. And we know, as Zachary, you mentioned, tear gas, right? And a lot has been used over the past month or so. And so Hong Kong people are also protesting against what they call police brutality as well. So and right now also another issue that the Hong Kong people, the protesters want to be heard is about the protesters who have been arrested, and there are about 700 of them according
many?
According to police numbers, and most of them are young people, and so a lot of people think that they are political prisoners, and they're not being released, and so they want the government to release them unconditionally without any charges, and so yeah, these are the basic demands. So it really has evolved from just opposing the extradition bill to more general issues about what's happening in Hong Kong.
And this is a dynamic that often takes shape in protest movements. They begin focused on one grievance, and then that opens up a conversation about a larger number of long-standing grievances.
Right, correct.
How do we understand what happened at the airport? Because for better or worse, that's getting a lot of attention. The apparent violence used by a small number of protesters at the airport, apparently tying up a government official. The protesters have apologized, but how should we understand that?
So So at the airport, I think most of the protesters have left, as far as I know, as of this morning. And what they were trying to do, there were a few things. One, they wanted to have a relatively safe place to protest because of all the tear gas that has been used on the streets, and even at the subway station. So it's happened a couple of times. And so for them, the protesters thought that if they gathered at the airport, the chances of police using tear gas would be minimal because they're visitors, they're passengers, and they're right because there was no tear gas at the airport, and so that's one thing. And the other thing is the protesters wanted the visitors to know what's been really going on through firsthand accounts. So while they were while they were walking around the airport, they were also holding up a lot of signs in different languages, so mostly in English, but also in other languages. And they were distributing flyers and just different materials to let international passengers know what's been going on. And the third goal that the protesters had gathering at the airport was to really force the government to talk to them and to respond to the issues that we just talked about. So,
Zachary, you had a question?
Yeah, how mainstream are the protesters? Are they still a fringe group of society, or does everyone in Hong Kong know people who are involved in the protests and who are part of the protests, or is it something that is still a smaller group of society?
So if we're talking about the protesters at the airport, the most frontline protesters, they are mostly young people, high school students, college students, or young professionals in their 20s maybe. But there is also a mix of people. There are older people, and they work different jobs, and their common goal was to really force the government to talk. And as far as whether they're a fringe group, I think in terms of the use of force, the means that they're using, then they are. This is the group that's more willing to clash with the police, and they're not afraid to go up to the front line and really face the police, right? But there are really a lot of protesters in Hong Kong who are against the extradition bill, who have gone out to the streets, and if you remember or you have seen news reports about the June 9th and June 16th protests, a lot of them, they are parents, grandparents, and who took their babies with them to protest, to march peacefully. So I think in terms of the use of force, I guess you can say that's a fringe group. But then if we look at the airport protests, a lot of them, they were not clashing with the police either. So yeah, it's a relatively small group. I guess it would be correct to say that that's willing to fight with the police, I guess.
But do they have the support, as best you can tell, as a citizen and scholar? Do the protesters, in their demands for protection of basic rights, do you think they have the support of the vast majority of Hong Kongers?
I think so. And actually, when these frontline protesters protest, they went to the airport or elsewhere on the streets, a lot of Hong Kong people, they would come support them by giving them meals, giving them subway tickets to go home or travel, and so they do have a lot of support that way, in from material support.
Right.
But that's driven by the general public support towards the cause.
Right.
About asking Carrie Lam and her government to respond to all these issues that most Hong Kong people really want to discuss.
Right. And this is what you'd expect. I mean, generally, for any movement, the protesters tend to be a smaller subset of a larger majority of people who are not in the streets but supportive of them.
Right, correct.
And that's what's going on here, you think?
Right, yeah.
So how should we think about the claim by the Chinese government that's being made all across social media and elsewhere that these are revolutionaries and extremists and fringe elements, and they're pointing, of course, to things like the small incidents of violence. How should we understand those claims?
I think one way to understand these claims is that Beijing is anxious about whether this relatively small group of protesters would gain more and more support and draw more protesters to take the same approach in terms of being willing to go to the very front line to confront the police. Because right now a big issue is really people are not happy with the amount of force that the police is using.
Sure.
So for Beijing, for them to see that these protesters are willing to risk being arrested and to disobey the police, then that's an alarm for them. And in light of what's happening elsewhere within mainland China,
Sure.
Then that's something that Beijing definitely doesn't want to see, and they want to take care of it as soon as possible, whatever that means, right? So Beijing is anxious, and so they right now what we're seeing in Hong Kong is they have pressured prominent businessmen to openly support the police, for example. That's one thing they have done. So and they have openly backed Carrie Lam and her government as well as the police force. So right now.
They've also had military exercises across the border, right? A kind of threatening activity, right?
Yeah. So there are different theories about what's happening there. Some people think that maybe they are preparing themselves to cross the border, but some people also have said that the October 1st is coming, is the 70th anniversary of the establishment of PRC, and so maybe they are just preparing for that, and that's the latest theory. I don't think I have enough information to really know for sure what that means, why there are so many armored vehicles across the border. So, and I'm hopeful that they're not going to cross the border at the moment. So, and I think what happened in '89,
right? Tiananmen, yeah,
right. So, and it is something that I don't think the Chinese government wants to repeat. So, and certainly they don't want to have that happen in Hong Kong.
Right, because of the public embarrassment and because of the backlash that would create. Right.
Yes, and the international community is watching, and there's widespread coverage, right, about what's happening in Hong Kong through different media outlets, right?
Sure.
So
yeah.
So the world is watching.
Right. You've used the phrase a number of times, Hong Kong people.
Right.
And this gets actually at the core of some of your research also, right? Is there a separate identity? Do those like yourself from Hong Kong see themselves different? Doesn't mean that they're not Chinese, but do they see themselves in a different way from the way mainlanders in China see themselves?
I think so. I think there's just a lot of differences between mainland China and Hong Kong, both politically, economically, culturally. So, and all these form our identity, right? And I think using the term Hong Kong people doesn't mean we're not ethnically Chinese, right? And I think it would be fair to say that we appreciate Chinese culture and we travel to China,
sure.
right? We
do a lot of business with China.
Right, yeah. And China and Hong Kong are really connected nowadays. And so I think that it's somewhat a complicated issue. I think identity is almost never straightforward in a way. And but I think with what's been happening, not just this year, but also in the past 20 years or so, and this Hong Kongness, if we could use that term, it's become more distinctive.
Interesting.
In a way. So yeah, I think for a lot of Hong Kong people, we're both Hong Kong people. We're also Chinese. So and there's a distinction between the Chinese people, China, and the current government, Chinese government.
Of course.
It's not there's no straightforward answer, unfortunately.
But it does seem that's at the root of this in some way, and that the citizens of Hong Kong are accustomed to and feel connected to a form of government and a form of society that's different from at least what is the standard form of political and social behavior on the mainland in China, right? I mean, that does seem to be, and this is something I remember in 1997 people predicted would be a problem.
Right, yeah, and what we're seeing right now is the effort to oppose the extradition bill, and even the bigger issue about being able to vote and to vote for the top leader, and that's an extension of that.
Right. Which to those in a different tradition seems so obvious, right? That you would at least get to vote for your leaders.
Right. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So where does this go, Shery? I mean, we can all unfortunately imagine a repeat of Tiananmen in 1989, and in a sense we don't have to talk about that right now because that's the nightmare we can all imagine. What are other scenarios? How can we expect or hope this would come out? What is a realistic end to this conflict, at least for the short run, that doesn't result in mass military intervention?
That's an important question, great question, and there's, again, no easy answer. I think one important thing that we can hope for is that the majority of protesters, or the majority of Hong Kong people, we all want peace. I think that's a fair statement, right? And using force on the protesters' side is really a last resort. So, and I don't have an update on that right now, but I think a couple marches are being planned right now for this weekend, and they have requested permission to take to the streets, but I don't know what the update is. And so I think a lot of Hong Kong people are willing to take to the street to express their view peacefully, and they have actually specifically asked that the more frontline protesters not to use any force. So I think there's still that rational side that we can hope will take over, and so that's the more short-term thing. And I think there will probably be more protests that will still happen. And what would be interesting to see is school is starting in a few weeks.
Right.
And as we have mentioned, a lot of these frontline protesters are students, high school students or college students. And some college students are planning walkouts and different things to protest. But I think it would be, I'd be curious to see what happens when school starts. Would they not go to school? Would they walk out? Would they keep going to the street, or they would do something else, or use another way to protest?
What would Beijing have to do to come to a realistic compromise? Let's assume that there's actually a desire to come to a compromise in Beijing.
One big demand Hong Kong people have right now is to talk to Carrie Lam and the government, because right now there is no conversation. Is basically protesters go out and then she responds by doing a press conference.
There's no direct communication.
No direct communication, and Hong Kong people feel that she has not really responded during those press conferences, and so they really want Carrie Lam to really talk to them, really respond to what they're asking her to do. So, and I think if Carrie Lam is willing to do that, I think that will be very helpful, and that will also ease some of the anxiety that Beijing is experiencing right now. So.
Sounds like a realistic step. So many of our listeners are concerned about these issues. but don't know what to do. They don't have the direct connections on the ground you have. And I'm sure you struggle with this too. What should non-Chinese, non-citizens of Hong Kong who care about these issues, what should we do?
This is going to sound very basic, but I think one thing that we all can do, no matter where we are, is to stay informed, because it's hard to lend support in some ways or form our opinions without knowing what's really happening. And I know a lot of us are doing that, but keep doing that. I would say stay informed, and the information is only one click away. And so keep paying attention to what's been happening.
News sources. What are the sources that are best to inform us?
News source. I think actually a lot of them, the mainstream media outlets, they're fine. I mean, there's a lot of coverage, and I use a lot of the local sources, but so local newspapers, and they're fine too. And Twitter actually is a pretty robust source.
Robust in all kinds of ways.
Robust in all kinds of ways, right? Yeah. So it's easy to access this information, thankfully. So we could all do that. And then for those of us in the U.S., I think there's also other ways to lend support and to express your opinions, because the Congress has actually they have introduced a bill on. Let me see if I can find the correct title. It's called the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act from 2019. It's a revision of the 92 Act. And Jeremy, you can probably speak to that a lot more than I can. But so something's happening in the U.S. as well. So if you want to contact your congressman about that, then that's a practical way to express to exercise your freedom, for sure. And so yeah, I think there are ways.
Traditionally, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have spoken out on behalf of the human rights of citizens in Hong Kong and other parts of China, traditionally. And that's beginning to happen again now. But your argument is that we could do more.
Yes.
Does that matter? Does that have an effect on the ground?
I think it matters. It matters in the sense that we can let the Hong Kong people know that they're not alone, because it's easy to feel that way after protesting for a while and nothing really is happening. Then it's easy to lose hope. But I think in the fight for democracy, we cannot lose hope, right? And that's one reason the protesters wanted to go to the airport, is to really let the international community know what's going on. And so I think it matters, and yeah, so if you are willing to do something about it, I would say definitely do something about it.
That's great. That's a great message. Zachary, does this resonate with you? Do you think that young people like yourself who care and are concerned about democracy in our country and abroad, that this is an issue that you'll pay attention to?
Yeah, I really think that young people care about other democratic movements, because it's inspiring, especially to see other young people involved in these issues. But at the same time, I also think that because the people of Hong Kong and China, but Hong Kong in particular, are so international, a lot of us know people from Hong Kong.
Sure. Like Shery.
And have experiences interacting with Hong Kong. And I think that's something that makes that makes the United States feel much closer to Hong Kong than it is to other countries. And I think that's something that we really need to remember as we see these things happening abroad.
Yes. I think that's a great point. I think, Shery and Zachary, you've shared with us, I think, one of the key insights, which is that democracy is not an American story, it's a global story.
Right.
And throughout our history and the history of other societies, the experiences of other people struggling for democracy often inspire and perhaps remind us what we're all about. And just listening to you, Shery, and your words, also your sincerity and your personal connection to this, I think should remind us all how at its root, right, democracy is about protecting the rights of people to have a basic say in their own lives.
Would it be okay if I read something?
Please.
So
please.
This is something I saw in the news through one of the local newspapers, and that's a letter that one of the protesters wrote. She had, I think it's a girl. So there's a Japanese version and an English version. So I'm reading what she actually wrote herself, and that's a message to the visitors who had just arrived at the international airport.
Please.
And if I'm correct, it was August 9th, so less than a week ago. So this is what she posted. It's a big Post-it note of sorts that she put on the ground. And she said, "Dear visitors, our homeland is sick. We are currently undergoing a difficult summer, trying to remove the tumors in her constitutional system. Welcome to Hong Kong, and thank you for your understanding. We promise you a Hong Kong at her best on your next visit." So I think, I don't know this protester, but the hope that she expresses, and I think this is something that we all can take to heart. And it's important what she's doing, what the Hong Kong people are doing. Yeah.
I think there's no better place to close this conversation for right now. I hope we can all think about that going forward. Thank you, Shery, for joining us and sharing what's an emotional as well as an intellectual perspective with us. Thank you, Zachary, for your poem. And thank you for joining us on This Is Democracy.
This podcast is produced by the Liberal Arts Development Studio and the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin.
The music in this episode was written and recorded by Harrison Lemke, and you can find his music at harrisonlemke.com.
Subscribe and stay tuned for a new episode every Thursday featuring new perspectives on democracy.